Most enterprise AI is built on stale data, and that's a problem. While companies brag about LLMs and chatbots, their critical decisions are still powered by outdated snapshots and clunky pipelines. In this episode of Great Things with Great Tech, we meet Deepti Srivastava, who also gave us Google Spanner at Google Cloud Platform, and now is founder of Snow Leopard AI. She's calling out the broken state of enterprise AI and showing us a new path, building real-time AI apps using fresh live data from SQL and APIs. No ETL, no delays, just answers. This is episode 99 of Great Things with Great Tech with Snow Leopard. Deepti, welcome to the show. This is amazing to have you on and to talk about Snow Leopard. Love the name, by the way. It's kind of amazing. We'll get into that a little bit later on in terms of the vision and to the name of the company. But before we get into what Snow Leopard does, really interested in your background because it's quite fascinating doing the research on you, where you've come from, and what you've actually been part of in your professional career already. It's quite amazing, and I'm sure a lot of people who are out there have understood Google Spanner, and they understand that that's a really big time platform in Google Cloud, and you had a hand in doing that. But before we get to that, give us a little bit of background about yourself, where you came from, and effectively how you came to be in technology.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anthony. It's so great to be here. And wow, that's quite the intro. So, yeah, I've been in technology specifically in building data and production data systems and infrastructure for about 2 decades now. I feel old.
Yeah,
But
I say that as well now. 20 years. It's like I'm one of those guys now that says I've been in this gig like 25 years. Yeah, I feel you.
Yeah. But so I feel, and in that time, like you say, I feel very fortunate because I've been part of not one, but 2 platform shifts, which is incredible. Both the sort of cloud shift and the data analytics shift. And it's been amazing to watch where software and applications and the whole sort of tech world has come in those past sort of 2 decades. And to talk about sort of how I got here and who I am, I've lived in sort of 10 different cities, give or take, on 3 continents. At this point, I feel very much like a citizen of the world. And I've learned so much about both people, about how technology impacts people, et cetera, in that time. And so I grew up in India. I went to grad school in Carnegie Mellon, so in the US in Pittsburgh. And I studied computer science in England. So
Okay.
I definitely sort of like hopped around. And at grad school, I was researching how you make this interconnected world of the internet work. Like basically my thesis topic was distributed fault tolerant systems, which is now what we call the cloud. So I feel very fortunate
Amazing.
that,
Yeah.
me and my cohort were sort of part of building that, sort of bringing cloud to life, which is very exciting. And for everyone, sort of infrastructure seems boring. And for me, there's 2 things. One, I'm really excited about infrastructure because it's the enabler. Like, that's where all the sort of ambiguous problems are. And sort of the well, how do you really make this work? Like those kinds of questions come up. And so that's always been exciting to me. I know we're talking about data infrastructure. It's like, oh, so boring. But to me, it's like, oh, that's where the crown jewels of every business, everything is. Data is really important. And so I've really been excited about that. And the second thing which has driven my career, and I didn't have the words for this earlier, but I really care about how technology impacts people. And sort of unconsciously or whatever, my career has gone from like an engineer, like a systems engineer at Oracle, like in the Oracle kernel, building sort of distributed locking, et cetera, to as you say, Spanner, to Google, where I switched to being essentially a product person, to what I'm doing now, which is running a company. But it's sort of that trajectory has been about well, how is what I'm working on, what I'm building, impacting humans, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of been what's driving me.
Yeah, I love that as well. And I love that you talk about infrastructure because I think a lot of the talk around modern day computing is around cloud and software and AI and what that is. But there's obviously something that backs that, and that's
Yeah.
infrastructure, right? So
Yeah.
I love that you're focusing there on, you mentioned it. I love the analogy around the crown jewels of every uh, enterprise. Data creation has to live somewhere, has to be created somewhere. You have to interact with something. You've got to run some tooling. No matter where that is, whether it's on-prem or the cloud, it is infrastructure that runs that. So I love that you focus in on that. And then the other part about helping people, become better or businesses become better and doing more technology, quite
Mhm.
clear in that sense. It's interesting. So Oracle, so that's some really deep stuff that you were doing at Oracle, right? That sounds pretty deep,
Yeah.
over my head. But then how did you get from Oracle to go to Google? And then what was the sort of genesis of working around Google Spanner? Because as I've sort of mentioned before, Google Spanner is kind of popular. And in fact, I know that from a Veeam perspective, when I'm out talking to customers, I'm a product manager at the moment as well. There, we get
Amazing.
where's our gaps?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
Google Spanner. Can you do Google Spanner? We get that quite often,
yeah.
right? So it's obviously found its way into enterprise in that NoSQL big data sort of scenario. So the impact is ongoing from your perspective. So well done there. But how did you get there?
Thank
Like,
you.
what was that kind of connection?
Yeah. Wow. I think what was motivating me, I think going back to your point about Oracle, right? Like I went from grad school to working on the only sort of, that level of deep distributed system that I could find at the time, like that I knew of, like which was, Oracle RAC is even today, actually, I was looking at DB Engines, is the largest installed database in the world, even today. Right. So in terms of like impacts, like that's pretty big, right? And like it's
Yeah.
not like trivial stuff. It's like, your airlines run on it and like your banks run on it and like your healthcare runs on it, right? So it's pretty interesting and ubiquitous technology. However you feel about the company and whatever, I think the
Yeah.
technology itself is pretty cool.
Yep.
And to be able to be in the lock, like if you're in a database, everything is a lock. And so when you're managing distributed locking, it's like you actually get to see almost everything, all the bugs sort of stop there, et cetera. So I had a really interesting bottoms up view of how enterprises worked, right? Like, how does, at the time, like, how does, this airline industry do ticketing? And when it fails, like, what are the sort of knock on effects of that? So that was really interesting. But as an engineer, like, I was going pretty deep, like vertically down, but I didn't
Hmm.
really know, apart from when bugs came in, what that technology was being used for. Why is it interesting?
Yeah. I
Why is it in
understand.
the critical path, et cetera, right? And so I think that's what drove me to Google, where I was looking for, well, how can I know the end to end, cradle to grave of a particular product, right? And Spanner at the time, I don't think the paper was published. I think it was still in the works. But or maybe it was published. I don't remember. This is like late 2012, early 2013. Um, so that was they were building something from the ground up that was supposed to scale almost infinitely, but was
Hmm.
a transactional database at
Transactional. Yep.
scale,
Yep.
which is I think the key difference here, right? Like we were not trying to say we're going to be semi-transactional or we're going to be eventually consistent, right? Like we were supposed to be like, in fact, Spanner has linearizability and serializability for the nerds and geeks about like consistency out there. And that was really interesting to me. I'm like, okay, why are we doing this? What are we doing? So I went to Google and my sort of nuclear project was to launch Spanner internally and then get all the sort of products that are Google products that everybody's familiar with and more onto Spanner, right? And the reason was because um, we were using MySQL for our ads database, which at the time was obviously the key to Google
Hmm.
Google's sort of whole business. We were having to like Google was having to shard it and quiesce it every 6 to 18 months, right? And each shard adding was taking between 6 and 18 months. So it was like this really complicated system, and nothing out there in the world was able to handle the scale that Google was hitting at the time for transactional data, right? So that's why Spanner was being built as from the ground up to really be the transactional, you know, it's called big data store
Yep.
at the time, right? But with global consistency. I don't think there's any system even today that actually matches Spanner's global transactional consistency. So it was like this really cool opportunity when I started, like there was 15 maybe engineers, like 10 engineers, and like we launched it in 9 months, and then in the next year or two, like I onboarded all the sort of billion user plus um, products that Google has, so Google Ads, Google Play Store,
Wow. Yeah. It's pretty
all
significant.
all of that. Yeah, it was, but again, that was another way to sort of see the impact from the bottom up, not from the top down, but from
Yeah.
the bottom
Yep.
up on like these are all billion user products. How does enabling the products that serve those billion users like really impacts the end user? Like because
Yeah.
I was now looking at the full end-to-end product, it was a really exciting and amazing learning opportunity around how to build technology products.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. I was talking about my previous episode, which went live this week as this episode
Mm-hmm.
is recording.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the product that everyone uses, but no one really knows they use. It was real-time analytics. It was
Yeah.
Apache Pinot, born out of LinkedIn. This is a similar story, and I love it because you're actually creating platforms and systems that everyone uses, but they don't actually know they use. And I love that. And that must make you feel a little bit special when you go, oh, look, people are using the Google Ads platform and Spanner's part of that. And that was I had a really big hand in that. And then what I also see is that people like Microsoft and AWS look at that and go, we got to do something about that. And that's how
Yes.
DynamoDB and that's how Azure Cosmo DB comes into play, right? Because that kind of
Yes.
came after. And I only realized that came after doing a bit of research as well. So to that end, they were kind of making it like a Me Too situation, actually. They were trying to copy and work out how we can do it. So I find, so in many ways, that's kind of cool as well. And that must be interesting from a product manager project perspective to see that fruition.
Do you know, first of all, thank you. That is very kind. I really, to be honest, I felt special being part of that team and being the product person for that product. It today also like it was such a special group of people trying to solve such a interesting problem. Like, having that confluence of interesting problem, interesting people, interesting time when the world was actually scaling up, right? Like Google was
Mhm.
ahead in the scale game, but like the world was also scaling up. And so it was just I just feel very fortunate for being part of that. And the thing you mentioned about Cosmos and DynamoDB global tables, which was released as a result of Spanner. Um, so this was because we launched Spanner externally on the Google Cloud Platform, right? So I came in to basically take Spanner internally and make it a ubiquitous service. And then, when Google Cloud happened around 2015, some of us in the company were like, and especially me from like the rack days, I knew that scalability was an interesting issue outside of Google as well, even if it doesn't need to be like infinite scale, like some scale is required with a transactional consistency. That means transactional consistency basically means, as a side note, that if I deposit money in the US and you and I, Anthony and I have a joint account and Anthony needs that money like right now, then once I deposit it, you can withdraw it on your end, right? Which is different from eventual consistency, which is like maybe you'll see if I deposit $50, maybe you see $50, maybe you see $100 because
Okay.
there was $50 already in the
Yep.
bank account, or maybe you see zero, right? Because we don't know if I withdrew 50 or if you withdrew 50, etc.
I get
So
you.
so that's really important from like a user perspective. Like you need to know what the money was in your account. There is no like, let's see what happens,
That's a
right?
great
So that's,
analogy. That's a good, good, layman's terms of what this actually all means, right?
yeah. So the underlying thing of like, this is supporting so many other products, like to your point, this is why this is important because ultimately it impacts users who really need to know the yes or no answer. Like, do I have money in my account, right? Or am I going to have overdraft fees because I don't have money in my account? And
Yeah.
so from that perspective, like when we launched Spanner externally as Google Cloud Spanner, that was truly sort of, I think, game changing for the industry in my perspective and game changing for the users, right? Because it pushed other clouds and other databases and other data sort of SQL providers to really like start to provide some of that functionality. So I feel really
Yeah.
good about, again, what we as a team accomplished, not just for ourselves, but I think bottom line for the end users.
Yeah. And foreshadowing a little bit where we are today in terms of data being super critical and where a lot of these generative AI platforms and AI in general and everything really, everything, it's all sucking data out from effectively these particular platforms, right? Like they're so significant in today's world. And I guess this is where we transition to Snow Leopard a little bit and talk about that. In 2023, established and founded this company, but there's a bit of a gap there to sort of go from say Google, Spanner, focusing on product and being in Google. What made you think that, hey, I've got an idea for uh, technology or a platform
Yeah,
because I'm
sure.
seeing a gap. I'm seeing a gap somewhere. What's that
Yeah,
gap?
you're right.
What's it trying to fix? And that's where Snow Leopard comes in. But tell me about that.
Yeah, so let me start with the gap, right? So you've had other guests that have talked about agentic AI. I think in the world of agentic AI and the awesomeness that we know SQL is, right? Structured storage is, um, I believe there is a chasm between that agentic AI and our crown jewels of business, which is structured data. And so the mission of Snow Leopard is, in a way, of like, how do we supercharge agentic AI with the power of structured data systems like SQL databases, right? That's what we're out to
Mhm.
solve for the world, for the developers. And in terms of that gap in like sort of how do you go from Google to Snow Leopard? So that's a very interesting question. I went from Google to be the head of product for this data visualization company called Observable. So it's like a little bit, it's in the sort of data application stack rather than like in the infrastructure layer, which was again a really interesting um, place to be because I was like, oh well, I've built infrastructure, but I want to see how it's used, right? Like how do we
Yep.
service it? So going up one level, both gave me a really even more sort of appreciation for how people use data and how difficult it is to really get data to answer the questions you need answered to make critical business decisions. And it reminded me that infrastructure is my first love,
Mhm.
right? And I did all of this during the pandemic. So basically I took a break from everything at the end of like not in the end, but like at somewhere in 23. Um, And I started looking around at what's happening in the world, right? Like I was just like, this is the first time since grad school that I really can just take a minute to
Yeah.
see where
Yeah.
the world is at. And ChatGPT broke at that time. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. This is AI. By the way, transformers were being built at Google and some of that metadata was on
Mm.
Spanner. So I've seen them again from the bottom up. I hadn't seen
Well,
how they
yeah.
impact.
We're in the week of Google Next, right? And what's coming out of there at Google. It feels like Google's finally kind of not so much caught up, but kind of taking the rightful place in terms of where they should have been. And everyone was kind of bagging them off and saying, oh, why Google struggling here? It's like, well, just wait a little bit. And I think we're starting to see that, especially from what I've seen this week in terms of the recording date. But anyway, go on.
No, I think Google's always built really awesome technology and to see them go to market with this is really cool. But going back to what I was saying was like
Mm.
I knew that transformers were interesting, but the way they were being used, like basically, I was like, oh, it requires too much data and too much compute for it to really be sort of ubiquitous as a technology, right? Like Google's and Metas of the world will build it and use it, and that's great. But how does it impact like people? And so when I turned
Yep.
around in 23, actually, and started looking at what was happening, I was like, oh, this is a like in 23, I was like, oh, this is a platform shift. Like this is no longer sort of hype AI. This is like going to have a real impact on people. And so I just set out like I do with how is all this stuff, LLMs, impacting people? Like, what's the use cases, right? So I just talked to my friends that I knew or people that I had, come across in my other work. So VPs of platforms at sort of CRM companies, like,
Mhm.
CTOs at sort of mid-sized companies that I sort of had came across. And so I just was like, hey, how are you using this? And it turns out that, you know, everybody was trying to figure out how to go from POC to production. Like POCs were cool, but production was like not happening. And so
Uh-huh.
I wasn't really like sort of looking for a problem or a solution. I was just like, how are people using it in
Interesting.
my true like just how does technology impact people? So how is this technology impacting people? Like, it's cool to chat with your PDFs, but that's not the, in my experience, right? Like, if you really need to put technology in the middle of it, you're going to have to put it in the critical path, right? So how are
Yeah.
you going to do that? And turns out, first I thought other people will do it, Google will do it, whatever. And then I was like, you know what? It's actually not something that people are not paying attention to it, and they're certainly not paying attention to. So I started the company early 24, actually, like, and we
Okay.
really started to get going
Yep.
sort of end of Q1, beginning of Q2 and 24. So
Very
like,
fresh. Very fresh.
so
One of my
9 months, yeah.
one of my freshest companies I've had on the show.
But we have customers, but like the point is that that's where this came from. I was like, oh, everybody's talking about unstructured data, documents, images,
Hmm.
playing games, writing, code with a co-pilot, et cetera. But how are you really using it in business decision making? And in my
Yeah.
experience, if you put a technology here, I know we're a podcast, so you can't see me gesticulate,
Oh, it's
but
visual as well.
but if you put it on the side and not in the middle critical path, then you're not going to derive the $1 trillion value of AI that everybody talks about, right? And so
Yeah.
that's sort of what engendered the thought around, building the data platform. I mean, I'm going to build a platform because I'm a platform person, but
Yep.
how do you enable AI developers that are like spread thin in a new world where you want to build production software? Like, how are you going to enable people to build those AI agents, AI assistants, all of that stuff, the good stuff, without connecting them to the crown jewels? You have to.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
think,
where
yeah.
Snow Leopard sits.
Yeah. And your point earlier, I think tying it back to what you talked about, working on core systems at Oracle, airline systems, you talked about money and bank transfers.
Mhm.
That's the connection that I think you're trying to make there. It's like this technology that we see in the public space, in pop culture is cool. Yeah, vibe
Yeah.
coding, making games that we could have made back in the 70s and all that kind of stuff. And talked about this and Microsoft kind of dumbing down people's idea of what it is to make them kind of lazier. So how can we really take this technology and make it work in that critical line like you talked about? And I guess the point that I know that I've kind of come across in the last few months is that getting the data out of these data lakes, these platforms, these structured systems is actually challenging. Not so much challenging in that you can't get it out because everyone can write a query and pull the data out, but it's about how efficient and how smart you get that out to impact a real-time system or real-time query or someone that's at the other end of the keyboard at that point in time. So if I'm putting the two together, that's kind of effectively how Snow Leopard, why Snow Leopard exists. And get on that in a second. Firstly, the name. I love we can see
Yeah.
the character and the logo there. How'd the
Yeah.
name come about? What's that kind of got in terms of background?
Yes. Oh, thank you for asking that. So I'm a solo founder. I'm a solo founder in tech infra, these are all like female solo founder tech and like, there's just multiple layers here. So for me to make this real, the first thing for me was like finding the name, like what is it that I'm really building and what are the characteristics of it?
Yep.
And so snow leopards are extremely sort of agile. They're very strong. They're extremely sort of targeted hunters, right? But they appear when they need to and disappear when they don't, right? They're also
Okay.
like from the Indian region, which is a harkening back to sort of my roots. And then they actually make amazing. They're one of the best mammal moms, and I'm a mother, etc. So this was all like stuff that to me is personal.
Yeah.
And I wanted the platform to be something that exists, is strong, is agile, is fast moving. They're very fast moving, that can support this fast moving world of AI and be strong and versatile for the AI developers, but not be in your face all the time, right? Like it should
Yeah.
just disappear. Real platforms provide you with simple APIs. We have like retrieve as an API, for example, and just the rest of it just doesn't matter. It's not your problem to deal with the resilience, the reliability, the accuracy. All that stuff we'll take care of. All the complexity of data retrieval we will take care of. You
Yeah.
just build the application. That's where it came from. There's a
I
side
think.
thing.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can I say that?
Yeah.
Um, I was also watching Kung Fu Panda with my son. He's
Yeah.
young, and and the Snow Leopard was there. And so I had already been looking at sort of characteristics of things, and then the Snow Leopard came, and I'm like, no, that can't be, is that it? And so there's like that
That's amazing.
personal thing to me
Yeah.
too.
I was going to say before that, that was probably the best articulation of a company name that I've ever heard, like in terms of
Oh,
on the
thank
show,
you.
right? Because it tied so clearly to all of your goals, but also yourself personally. And then at the end to come and say that you kind of validated this through Kung Fu Panda, that makes it even more amazing. So no, that's cool. So let's talk about very quickly the platform, how it's different from others. Where's the innovation here? I mean, what I'm reading into it is that it basically eliminates the need for predefined data pipelines, ETLs, that sort of stuff, which from my understanding, again, I'm not in that data science world, very much on the periphery, know that data is important and there's a gravity towards it. But that takes time, right? Like to be able to create those pipelines, the ETL processes, the end-to-end of that is very time consuming. And also not just from the pre-time, but actually post, like day 2 operations, maintenance, changing when the data changes and shifts. So is this effectively what Snow Leopard is trying to take away and make more efficient?
Oh my God, Anthony, you should, yeah, I think I need you to talk to everybody else in the world about Snow Leopard.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you give me a few minutes, let me elaborate. I
Go for
think
it.
going back to sort of my days building and then producting systems, like evangelizing, selling, you know, thinking about like how these data systems work, how they work inside enterprises, how they work inside businesses has been like, to me, the Snow Leopard is a culmination of all of those, systems in my head. So there's a couple of things that are facts of life, in my opinion, when it comes to data. And I think you with your day job probably relate to them, right? One is data silos are a fact of life, right? There is always a data silo out there, no matter how beautiful, big, amazing your data lake and data warehousing solution is. There's always a data source that you have not thought of, that you have not ETL'd in, and is out there. Number one, right? So then this thought process around, and this is before AI, like just in general, like data is hard. Managing data is hard. Putting it in one place. The thought process around AI these days is like, oh, you put it in one place and then you query that one place. But
Yeah.
that's not real. That's like the ideal world.
Mhm.
The second thing is, data, like actually tech stacks exist in a context in every single business, whether it's an enterprise or a small mom and pop shop. There is a system that organically grew. So some parts of that company use, let's say, Postgres, another part uses MySQL, another part uses Oracle, another part uses Snowflake, another part uses Databricks, another part uses SQL Server. And so, if you really want technology to have an impact, you have to be in the middle of the stack. You cannot exist outside of it. When you sit outside of it, you get things like, chat with your PDF, right? Which is not actually for the most part, it's not really in the critical path. When you're talking about recommendation systems, right? Like recommendation systems may fail, but you can still serve the answer. So one of the things is like, for this technology, LLMs and AI and all that to exist and really have an impact on businesses and users at the end of it, like you have to put it in the critical path. That's number 2. And then number 3 is like what you said, right? Let's say you've built the most beautiful system. Maintaining it, managing it, these are extremely brittle systems, so you have to constantly keep up, right? Like, by the way, if we switch to AI world, right? We've gone from predefined data pipelines to an ad hoc question answer system, essentially, with LLMs.
Get it?
In an ad hoc essential question answer system, building a data pipeline or a dashboard that takes like from days to weeks to months just doesn't work. You're going to be constantly out of date, right?
Yeah.
So these are sort of the learnings that we have put into Snow Leopard. So the point of Snow Leopard becomes that we just sit in the middle, in between all of your data sources and all of your agentic AI or AI applications, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And based on the ad hoc question, we will serve you the data that you need. We will go to the data system, we will fetch the data, and we will give it to you, which means the data is the freshest it needs to be. It's the live data, and we are querying it natively, which means that it's going to be accurate, and it's like going to be the most performant it can be because we're querying it in the native language.
Okay.
So what if I were to give you an example? Can I give an example?
Yeah, of course, yeah. 'Cause I'm painting a picture in my head, and I'm kind of working out a central interpreter, kind of man in the middle situation. But yeah,
Yes.
let's hear it from you as an example, because I think that'll help.
Yeah. So I think normally how this is done, let's talk about that first, is that you either have a data lake and then you serve, like when you're building an LLM-based system, whether it's agentic AI or assistance, like RAG has become the de facto way to do this. RAG means you basically ETL your data into a vector store, and then at query time, at the question time, you pick the data from the vector store and you augment the context of the LLM, and then the LLM will give you an answer, just roughly, right? Now, there's two problems with this. First, it suffers from all the issues with ETL, which is there's always a data silo out there that was not part of the ETL. ETL takes long, is expensive, is hard to manage, maintain, etc. So your data is always out of date. So that means you can't answer questions like, what happened to the order I just made on the website, for example, which we'll get to in a second. So RAG, in my opinion, it's great for unstructured data. It's great for PDFs. It's great for images, but I don't think it works for structured data. The second part of this, the vector store, is that it's a fuzzy matching system. So you've taken 40, 50, 60 years of database research, right? Where you give very precise answers and you get yes or no answers, right? From a SQL system or an API. And you've now turned it into a fuzzy matching system, which is like you've lost all the data context, all the schema, like all that stuff is lost, right? Like it's no longer an accurate system. And then we blame the LLMs for hallucination. And there is blame to be had on the LLMs for hallucination, but if you give it the wrong data, even the most capable intelligent machines today, humans, will not give you the right answer if they don't have the right data.
Very good. Yeah, I've always wondered that with embeddings and vector search and whatnot, because I've been playing around with it, talking about POCs and MVPs and everything with LLMs. But I kind of thought that, well, if I'm doing a chatbot or I'm looking for an AI analysis leveraging an LLM to augment with the RAG, and it's looking at the vector search, it's kind of like almost the whole thing, but it's not. It's guessing a little bit. To your point, using the fuzzy logic is kind of good way to look at it. Because I've always thought if it's just assuming that it could be the same as to what I'm looking for based on what I enter in, then it's not exactly what I want.
Yeah.
So is that really helping me in terms of the outcome that I want? To your point, and I think you've articulated again that problem that I've always thought about vector searches quite well. Anyway, continue.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that again, as a person who's spent their entire life building, these deterministic systems, to go from there to like, if I'm looking for Anthony and let's say this last name is SPI, and not your full last name, you and that other person are going to be served as answers because it's close enough, right? So who's doing the disambiguation there, right? But if you ask a database, it'll say I either have Anthony SPI or right, like, or it says no, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's a bunch of research and like development and all that stuff that have gone into making those systems so deterministic. So why don't we just use those systems, right? So that's the second thing here. And so what Snow Leopard does is we sit inside your trust domain. So we're not saying ETL data into some third party thing. We sit next to your data sources, right? And when a question comes in, like what is my, where is my order, or did my order go through or not, for example, based on the question, we decide, oh, this needs to go to the order management system and the CRM system, right? So it'll go to Postgres and to Snowflake. It'll write, so we do intelligent routing, we do intelligent data retrieval, which means we figure out which place to go in real time. Then we build the Postgres query and the Salesforce query or the Snowflake query in real time in the native language, so PostgreSQL, SQL, and Snowflake SQL. Then we go run those queries on those systems. then when the data is sort of returned, we retrieve it back and give it back to you.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
So, so instead of consolidating all the data, we are doing a federation approach, right? So we can get the freshest data out, and we are not in the business of storage at that
Okay.
point.
Yes. I
So
was going to say.
governance,
Yeah.
yeah, data like in unnecessary data movement, unnecessary data security holes are not created in this case, right? And the third thing is that because we're fetching data natively, we can both be accurate about it, right? And we can like serve the freshest data back.
Yeah. It's the ultimate conduit, effectively. If I'm gonna simplify it.
Yeah, it's sort of it's in the middle, but again, it gives users, the people, the ability to focus on building the application on top, the agentic framework on top, and like lets us deal with that data complexity. But like my point was like, what if you data pipelines are all squiggly lines, right? So what if you just erased all those squiggly lines and just had clear, straight connections? That's the point of Snow Leopard.
Yeah, that's cool. And it simplifies that process to the point earlier. So yeah, it's so and obviously in the middle of that's the brain, that's the smart of Snow Leopard is the fact that you've got sort of an agentic potential system. You're probably leveraging elements of AI to create those native queries as they're required, which I think is really cool as well. I toyed a little bit actually with asking the LLM to create a Postgres query on the fly, depending on what the question was or what the prompt was, and then it got given an example, and then it built the query itself off the example specific to the prompt. And I thought that was kind of cool, right? But you're just doing this on steroids at a much huger level for real problems, really, right?
Two things. We're not using text to SQL because text to SQL is inherently non-accurate and can hallucinate. Number one.
Good clarification.
Directly, right? What we're doing is we're using LLMs for things that they're good at, which is classification, summarization,
Yep.
matching things, etc. Right? Like that's why I said intelligent routing and intelligent data query and building, right? But so we're using AI for what AI is good for, and we're using deterministic systems programming for what that's good for. So we already know, in a way, how to build queries, as long as you know what query to build. And so the what is the intelligence that we're using. And yes, we're using basically an agentic LLM system for that. But it's, to your point, it's on steroids. But this agentic system understands business logic at a general scale, right? So each developer doesn't have to build their own agents to do that. And then we're using essentially deterministic system programming to build those queries on the fly.
Good stuff. We've got about 2 minutes left. I just had a quick thought on that. So is it customizable per client that you're going to bring on, or is it?
That is exactly right.
So you'll work with the customer to make it customizable to make sure they get to where they need to be to get the outcome they desire.
Yeah. So the key here is we want time to first question to be like a day versus time to first question for building something from scratch or when you don't have the data source is like weeks and months. But in this case, all you do is give us access to the data stores you want to give us access to, right? And tell us, your schema, and then you can start asking questions in a day.
Love it.
Right? And then if you need to add a new data source, there isn't a new pipeline you're building. You're just giving us another N+1 access.
Yeah.
And then we can go from there. So I think the key here is you are not only are you not building the data pipeline, like we are not even building the data pipeline. Like we're just making sure that we can, access the system, and then you can go off and ask questions, which I think is a game changer for people in sales, marketing, support, etc.
That's awesome. Yeah. Got a minute left. Usually we talk about futures, but I feel like we've already talked about where this is going and what it is and what's in the future for the general industry and where the problem is and where we are actually tracking the solution. So in a couple of seconds, tell us a little bit more about, where is Snow Leopard going from here? Any other information you want to give? Because you are early, but I'm sure you're going to be successful. But just give us a 30-second spiel.
Thank you for saying that. So we are working with design partners right now. We're very excited to have space for a few more design partners. So if anybody else out there has this problem in your audience, I would love to talk to them. You can always reach me through Deepti@snowleopard.ai or sign up on the website, right? I'd love to hear from you. But yeah, we're actively working with design partners to provide solutions for this problem for them.
Awesome. Great stuff. Hey, this has been a fantastic conversation. I love what you're doing. I love your story. I love your passion for infrastructure and solving this really real world future state problem. So, hey, thanks for being on episode 99 of Great Things with Great Tech.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, just as a reminder, thanks for listening to this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to highlight companies and technologies shaping our world. Don't forget to follow us on social media at G2WGT Podcast and visit g2wgt.com for more great content and all past episodes. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. Please spread the word, and if you feel like it, drop a review. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.